Welcome to St Nicholas Church, and I'm going to give you a tour of the church from the outside first and tell you a little bit more about the churchyard itself. So let's go. So a church is often on a raised site because of religious pre-Christian significance. An alternative explanation is that as the graveyards filled up with bodies, the ground increased in height, or built to avoid flooding. In the churchyard, Christians bury their dead with feet towards the rising sun, a sign of hope, east towards Jerusalem, believed to be where the second coming of Christ would appear. Medievals believed that the side of the church you were buried in was significant. On the brighter and lighter south side, you would find most people buried. But on the darker, shadier north side was the location for criminals, those who committed suicide, and infants that were not baptized. You will find that churchyards whose boundaries have not changed significantly will have a larger space to the south and a smaller space to the north due to the preference for this south side. Porches would be used for civil and marriage business, and in medieval times, couples met and asked for consent to be married before entering the church. The church was also a place of sanctuary for someone who wished to escape the authorities for 40 days, as the space was governed by church law rather than secular authority. Towers were used for the purpose of housing bells and for reasons of defence when the neighbourhood was threatened by hostile action. The bells were the oldest man-made sound to be heard across Essex countryside for centuries and were to summon the living, mourn the dead, and declare national days of rejoicing. The bells in the West Tower are from the 17th and 18th centuries. Bell number 1 is W&P Reitman of London, 1695. Bell number 2 is Thomas Newman of Cambridge, 1723. Number 3 was made by J. Keane in 1631. And number 4 bell was Robert Oldfield, made in 1613. The inside of a church is packed with meaning. There is specific relevance in the layout. The stoop by the entrance contains blessed water, and entrants would dip their finger and sign with the cross as they wish to be spiritually clean before entering. The font is placed at the rear of the church near the start of the aisle and represents the Christian's journey through life towards God. It is also near a doorway so that you live your faith facing outwards to the world. The font is used for baptism and welcome into the community and is one of the 7 sacraments. The nave in Latin is navis, meaning ship, the root of the English word navigation. If you look up, you will see how the roof represents the upside-down hull of a ship. Pews were a fairly modern invention. Medievals would stand, although there were some wooden benches along the side for the weak, hence the phrase, the weakest to the wall. Pews were installed after the Reformation, as emphasis on the sermon was developed. They could also be quite lengthy. The nave had no fixed seating and was used as a public hall. There was no distinction between sacred and secular. Only the chancel was regarded as the Holy of Holies. The great rood above the screen reminded people in the nave that they were in the presence of God. The nave was sometimes used as a marketplace. The columns have two meanings. One was to represent trees with leafy decoration, like sacred groves. A second was to represent human figures. Decoration can be in various forms. Doric is where they have a plain decoration at the top. Ionic is where there's plain with small curls at the end. And Corinthian are much grander and more ornate capitals used in honour of the Virgin Mary. Arches signify arms thrown up in worship to God. Marriage always takes place under an arch. Michelangelo defined an arch as two powerful forces that meet at their weakest point to make a stronger whole, a metaphor for marriage. The organ in St Nicholas Church is believed to have been built in 1780 and was once owned by Samuel Sebastian Wesley, the grandson of Charles Wesley. The only bit of our medieval rood screen left is here, on the back of the organist's chair. The roses on the rood screen symbolise purity and the Virgin Mary. If we could step back in time to the 15th century, what would we see here? Well, there would be no tombstones in the churchyard. There was no need, as the dead were commemorated in prayers of the faithful and in requiems. Therefore, the space outside was used for meetings, sports, and dancing. As we entered the church, we would notice the smell of sweet scented herbs that would be found on the floor. There was only one mass on a Sunday and very few benches. A new piece of furniture was the pulpit, although our one is dated to the 18th century. These began to appear in the 14th century. Painting would be seen on the walls for the illiterate masses. These would depict biblical scenes, stories, and most commonly, heaven and hell. You would see much more colourful walls and roofs. There was no communion rail, as this was administered in the nave by the priest coming through the screen. The church ale festival, organised by the church warden, was held 3 times a year at Christmas, Easter and Whitsun in order to raise funds for the church. And this involved feasting and dancing in the church, but the practice had died out by the 19th century. A hagioscope, or squint, is an architectural term denoting a small splayed opening or tunnel at seated eye level for an internal masonry dividing wall of a church in an oblique direction, normally southeast or northeast, giving worshippers a view of the altar and therefore of the elevation of the host. What about moving on to the 18th century? You would start to see some monuments in the churchyard, but only for those who could afford it. When opening the door, you would see a forest of pews, box pews lined with coloured bays with doors. At the east end of the nave, or in the chancel, was the squire's pew. The walls were now lime-washed with painted text over the chancel arch. Around the west-facing chancel arch, there used to be some text from the Bible. The prayers of a righteous man availeth much, from the letter of James, chapter 5. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God, from the letter to the Romans, chapter 8. The rood screen may well have been taken down along with the stone altar. This would have been replaced by a small communion table covered by a red velvet cloth with rails around it to stop the dogs from entering. Behind the table on the walls, either side would be framed boards with the Lord's Prayer, the Creed, and the 10 Commandments. Communion rails were put in for people to draw near with faith and receive the sacrament. In the Victorian period, there would be many gravestones. The box pews were taken out in 1868 and were replaced by pitch pine Gothic pews. The smell would be of oil lamps and furniture polish, and the chancel would have choir stalls, and the floor would now be paved with red tiles. This is quite unusual in that the mason who built the chancel actually left his name engraved on the chancel arch. His name, Geoffrey the Mason, and he wrote, built in 1270. Every church had a parish chest, and in it would be kept valuables and important documents for the parish. There would normally be 3 keys, one for the parish priest and the other 2 for the church wardens. This is our parish chest in the appropriate place in the northern side of the chancel. Well, thank you for coming. And of course, come along and visit any time. The church is open from dawn till dusk every day. Bye for now.